My dear friend, I have little doubt that the afternoon of November 7th, 1847, is as fresh in your memory as in my own. We had assembled in the Johanniskirche to accompany the remains of Mendelssohn on their last sad journey. And by chance, for I had not been long in Leipzig, and my acquaintance with you was slight, we walked side by side in the long line of mourners. From grief at the early loss of our master. From grief at the early loss of a master whose cultivation, self-discipline, and endeavors after the good and the beautiful had exercised a truly beneficial influence over the art of our age. Our great talk turned to the more particular consideration of music in itself, and to the great masters of the past. This led us to the interchange of many ideas, and to a conviction of our unanimity of principle and sentiment on most subjects. Thus, for instance, we coincided in our experience that at a certain period of our mental development, Mozart's music had seemed cold and unintelligible to our restless spirits, ever soaring into the unknown, and incapable of appreciating a master whose passions in their workings are not laid bare to view, but who offers us perfect beauty, victorious over turbulence and impurity. Turning to him again in later years, we are amazed alike at the wondrous wealth of his art, and at our former insensibility to it. For my own part, I confided to you how, after severe illness which had debarred me from music for many years, it was Mozart who first gave me courage and interest to turn to it again. We agreed also that minds which are able to receive and appreciate art for its own sake must yield themselves captive to Mozart, but without sacrificing their freedom to recognize all that is grand and beautiful everywhere. This conversation was the beginning of a more constant intercourse, leading to a friendship founded on such close agreement of principle in all matters of importance as to render it indissoluble. I have ever since, in joy or sorrow, been assured of your hearty sympathy and support. I should be perfectly justified in offering you this book as a testimony of my love and gratitude, even if its contents concerned you less. But music has ever played so important a part in our intercourse, whether I sat beside you at the piano or stood behind your chair, or we wandered into talk. So great a share in the book belongs to you, who have ever urged me forward with the work. Sometimes I may acknowledge it now, even unmercifully, that I can offer it in its completed form to none with more pleasure and confidence than to yourself. And now you must give me leave to lay before you much that is on my mind concerning it. Let me imagine that I have come as of old to you and your wife for comfort and encouragement, and prepare for a long talk. You are aware, my dear friend, how this biography originated and how it has gradually increased to an extent which has alarmed even myself. Occupied at first only with the biography of Beethoven, I soon saw that it would be impossible to do full justice to his great and original creations without a clear survey of the life and works of Mozart, the pioneer of the musical future, and whose natural heir, Beethoven, attained his preeminent position in the history of music. The exposition would have been too comprehensive for an introduction, and I determined to arrange the ill-digested and unreadable mass of biographical material which Nissen had collected into a readable treatise on the life of Mozart, to serve as a foundation for the observations which I meant to deduce therefrom. With this end in view, I gradually amassed so large a store of materials for the story of his life and the appreciation of his works, that there arose before me the duty of erecting a new structure upon a new foundation. But before I proceed to specify the sources whence I have drawn my materials, allow me to glance over all the biographies of Mozart hitherto published, so far as they are known to me. Soon after Mozart's death, there appeared a biographical article upon him in Schlichtegrol's Necrologue, for 1791. This is precise and trustworthy so far as it relates to the period of his childhood, and rests on the testimony of his sister, but the notices of his later years are superficial, and the judgment passed upon him as a man rests upon a preconceived and unfavorable opinion, which then prevailed in Vienna, partly on professional grounds, and which took such deep root that even at the present day I know not if I shall succeed in establishing the truth. It was not surprising that Mozart's widow, in order to stop the circulation of such injurious representations, should buy up an impression of this article which appeared under the title of Mozart's Life. Graz, 1794. Jos Georg Hubeck, Graz, 1794. A biography which appeared the same year in Sonnleitner's Vienna Theatre Almanac, page 94, is only an abridgment of the article in the necrologue, and a French translation was made by Bayle, under the nom de plume of Bombay and Stendhal, as Lettres sur Haydn suivi d'une vie de Mozart, Paris, 1814. An English translation of the article appeared in London, 1817, and a revised French version in Paris, 1817. A life of the imperial Kapellmeister Wolfgang Gottlieb Mozart, compiled from original sources by Franz Niemeczek, Prague, 1798, is founded partly on communications by the family, especially the widow, partly on personal acquaintance with Mozart. I have made use of the second edition of this work, 1808. Unfortunately, it does not enter into details so much as might be wished, particularly in its later portions. But all that this excellent, well-informed, and devoted friend records of Mozart is trustworthy and accurate. Something more was to be expected from Friedrich Rochlitz, who busied himself for a considerable time in writing a biography of Mozart. He had become acquainted with him during his stay in Leipzig in 1789, and moving much in musical circles with Doles and Hiller, he was so charmed with the genius and amiability of the master that he even then carefully noted whatever appeared remarkable in their interviews. When he afterwards proposed to prepare a life of Mozart, both the widow and the sister supplied him with anecdotes and traits of character. And the widow further, as I gather from their letters, allowed him to make use of Mozart's correspondence. Some of the anecdotes and particulars supplied by the widow and sister, or resulting from his own observation, were published and Rochlitz often alluded in later issues to his acquaintance with Mozart, but there it remained, and I have failed to discover why he abandoned his idea of a biography. When Niece's biography appeared, he complained that he had not been called into counsel by Mosel, and was of opinion that the widow must have changed very much in her old age if she was not proved to have acted shabbily in this affair. I set on foot investigations as to whether Rochlitz had left behind any records or communications which, springing from now exhausted sources, might be of service to me in my work. This led to a discovery which, painful as it is to me to cast a slur on the memory of an otherwise deserving man, I must yet, in the interest of truth, reveal. I could not fail to observe that those particulars of Mozart's life which Rochlitz gives as the result of his own observation, or as narrated to him by Mozart, are peculiar to himself in form and coloring, and that many of the circumstances which he relates with absolute certainty are manifestly untrue. I sought to account for these facts as slips of memory, or the result of that kind of self-deception which confounds a logical inference with a fact springing from it, but my search led to the further discovery of a parallel. between Mozart and Raphael, giving a detailed account of the circumstances of Mozart's marriage, and with express reference to Mozart's own narrative of the affair, which Rochlitz was supposed to have written down the same night. Now for the period which is here treated of, that is between 1780 and 1783. Mozart's entire correspondence is preserved, and any error upon essential points is, as you will readily grant, impossible. All the statements of Rochlitz as to time, place, persons, and events are completely false. You will remember my consternation at this unwelcome discovery. No poetical license could account for it, unpleasant as it is. I consider it my duty to expose the affair, partly that it may teach caution, partly that tedious and vexatious discussion may be avoided, should the narrative in question ever be printed. These anecdotes from the AMZ, together with the information of Schlittergroll and Niemetschek, have formed the chief material for the more or less complete accounts of Mozart, which afterwards appeared. What was added consisted partly of anecdotes, generally badly authenticated, and often ill-turned, such as gain currency among artists, and partly of phrases or turns of speech which, as Zelter says, everyone makes for himself. I must not spare you the enumeration of some of the works of this class. Kramer's Anecdotes sur Mozart, Paris 1801, is a mere translation of the anecdotes. Some of them, together with a general account, are also given by J.B.A. Suard, Anecdotes sur Mozart, in his Mélange de littérature, Paris 1804, as well as by Guattani in the Mémoires encyclopédiques romanes, Rome 1806. A work of more pretension is Mozart's Geist, Sen Kurzbiographie und Ästhetische Darstellung seiner Werk, 1803. Zelter asked Goethe to tell him who was the author of this short biography half dedicated to Goethe, which was neither short nor aesthetic, nor a good likeness of the man, and was not a little surprised to learn that Goethe knew nothing either of the work or its author. It was, however, by J.E.F. Arnold of Erfurt, whose subsequent publication, Mozart and Haydn, was scarcely calculated to draw a more favorable expression of opinion from Zelter. Of no greater intrinsic value are Hormer's statements in the Austrian Plutarch, 1807, or Lichtenthal's Ceni Biografici intorno al celebre maestro Wolfgango Amadeo Mozart, Milan, 1816. I have not been able to procure the Elogio Storico di Mozart del Conte Schizzi, Cremona, 1817. The articles in Gerber's Tonkunstlexikon are carefully compiled but not complete. And Mozart's biography by J.A. Schlosser, Prague, 1828, 3rd edition, 1844, is a compilation altogether wanting in judgment. An unsuspected wealth of fresh resources was brought to light by the biography W.A. Mozart's by G.N.V. Nissen, Leipzig, 1828. In order to estimate this book justly, and to make a right use of it, it is necessary to ascertain how and whence it proceeded, a task of considerably more difficulty than merely mocking and railing at it. Nissen, who came to Vienna after Mozart's death as a Danish diplomatist, became acquainted with his widow and interested himself in her unprotected condition. He had a great turn for business matters and was fond of arranging papers, writing letters, and even copying, without understanding what it was that he was occupied about. He therefore willingly undertook to put Mozart's effects in order, to assist the widow in all her business arrangements, and to carry on her correspondence. A long series of letters which he wrote in her name show him to have been a well-meaning, sensible man, somewhat over-circumstantial in his style of writing. After his marriage with Mozart's widow, he felt it his duty to labor with the same conscientious care for his memory as he had formerly done for his property, and he employed the leisure of his remaining years, which were spent at Salzburg, in carrying out this design. We ought to own ourselves deeply indebted to him, for without His care of the most important documents and traditions would have been hopelessly lost. Mozart's sister was then living at Salzburg. Her recollections and those of his wife afforded an abundance of characteristic traits, and the carefully preserved papers and family correspondence were a rich mine of authentic documents. Besides a number of separate deeds, letters, and memoranda, he had at his disposal Leopold Mozart's letters to Hagenauer during the journey to Vienna, September 1762 to January 1763. During the great journey from June 1763 to November 1766, etc. Wolfgang's and his mother's letters home, together with the answers of Leopold and his daughter during the journey to Paris, September 1777 to January 1779. Wolfgang's correspondence with his father and his sister during his journey to Munich and residence in Vienna. Wolfgang's letters come down to 1784, his father's to 1781. Nissen possessed both the industry and the goodwill to turn these treasures to account. Unhappily, these qualities do not suffice for such an undertaking. Not to mention that he has no idea of adaptation or of description. He had neither taste nor cultivation in music, nor tact to distinguish what was trivia from what was important, nor was he capable of accurately conveying an idea. Having had at my service a portion of the documents made use of by him, I have been able to check him and to form an idea of his mode of proceeding. He is never dishonest, never alters with intent to deceive, but he deals with his documents in the most summary manner possible. He seldom gives them entire, but only so much of them as he considers of interest. Unfortunately, he is no judge either of what is musically important nor psychologically interesting, and thus his selection is often singularly unhappy. He was influenced, too, by consideration for distinguished living personages and by the prejudices of his wife, who naturally wished many family circumstances to remain untouched. His sins, however, are always those of omission. But silence, by obscuring the connection of events and by concealing the motives of actions, may be as prejudicial as actual misstatements to historical accuracy. And the sufferer by a too tender consideration for the feelings of others is invariably the person whose character it is attempted to depict. Fortunately, for the most important years of Mozart's life, from 1777 onwards, I have been able myself to make use of the family correspondence. You will see what a different conception I have thereby been enabled to form of this period. It is of less importance, but nevertheless a drawback, that Nissen has thought good to alter the details of style and expression in many of the letters. Neither father nor son were in need of such emendations, both writing clearly and shrewdly, and with an individuality all their own. But even were this not the case, and Nissen the man, which he was not, to correct their defects, such an effacement of individual character would remain altogether inexcusable. Had Nissen confined himself to the publication of the letters and extracts, together with such information as he could gather from Mozart's wife and sister or from other credible witnesses, he would have done posterity important service. But in attempting more than this, he verified the saying of Hesiod, that the whole is less than the part. Many manuscripts, newspapers, journals, etc., treating of Mozart's professional doings had been preserved among the family archives. Not content with these, Nissen has taken incredible pains to collect whatever else had been written concerning Mozart. He has then copied out all that appeared to him important, and has arranged these extras categorically, as seemed to him good, putting together, for instance, all that related to one particular work. Finally, he has huddled together these heterogeneous fragments without design, connection, or explanation. If this confused and ill-proportioned mass is to be made use of at all, it must be separated into its component parts, and these must be restored to their proper place and connection. It may fairly be taken for granted that where any idea or judgment is expressed, Nissen is not speaking in his own person. He has, however, simplified the task of restoring each fragment to its proper position by a catalogue of the writings in which Mozart is mentioned. And although some documents made use of by him have since disappeared, I have been able in almost every case to discover his authorities. In most cases these are of little value, but among much that is worthless there are here and there communications resting on family traditions, which Nissen has tacitly appropriated with but slight alterations. It is undoubtedly desirable to be able to appeal to the original in such cases, but for the most part they speak for themselves and are seldom of importance. The statements I have made were necessary for the proper use of Nissen's work, but you must not therefore imagine that I am unjust towards him. True, the mass of printed matter is enough to drive one to absolute despair, but when it is remembered that a large portion of the documents he embodies have since disappeared, we must be grateful to the man who has enabled us to take so comprehensive a glance into an artist's life, and who has labored with unselfish reverence for Mozart's memory, while a succeeding generation did not think it worth while even to preserve the documents which Nissen made use of. It must not be lost sight of, either, that Nissen did not see his work through the press. He died on March 24, 1826, before it was put in hand, and it is quite possible that he would have improved it in many ways upon final revision. It is significant that although all were agreed that Nissen's book was unreadable, without alteration and adaptation, no writer in Germany undertook the task, and that it was left to foreigners to turn the treasure to account. Fétis undertook it in his Biographie universelle de Mussien, Brussels, 1864, so far as it could be done within the narrow limits of a general work of the kind. But the obvious task of compiling an interesting and readable biography by means of an orderly arrangement of the really interesting portions of Nissen's material was first undertaken by Edward Holmes in his Life of Mozart, including his correspondence, London, 1845. Holmes has arranged the essential portions of the correspondence with intelligence and discrimination, and has connected them by a narrative built upon previous notices. He has thus produced a trustworthy and, as far as was possible, an exhaustive account of Mozart's life. Holmes has, moreover, made use of André's published catalogue of Mozart's works, and the indications there given of their date of appearance. He undertook a journey through Germany to inspect the original manuscripts in André's possession, and to collect stray oral traditions. He took care to make himself acquainted with musical literature, and the result is a work which must be considered as the most trustworthy and serviceable biography that could be produced by a skillful employment of the materials generally accessible. Holmes has not attempted to draw from hitherto unknown sources. He neither carries his researches to any depth, nor offers any original opinions. Holmes has not attempted to draw from hitherto unknown sources. He neither carries his researches to any depth, nor offers any original opinions or explanations.